Welcome back to another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight-up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, Test Drive Unlimited is back. Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown is the first new game in 13 years. Well, the first new Test Drive Unlimited game. Obviously, there have been games made in the last 13 years. The first two Test Drive Unlimited games were really good open world racers. They were revolutionary in a lot of ways, so it's pretty exciting to see this series return after all this time, even with new developers. The new version of the series is being published by Nacon and developed by KT Racing, a studio I know nothing about, except that they used to be called 4X Studio and made a really bad World War I FPS called Iron Storm. That was 22 years ago, though, so I'm not going to hold it against them. At least I'm going to try not to. I don't even really remember that game, so It's been a while, obviously, so Test Drive is... it might not be familiar to everybody here. Most folks playing this game just want a good driving game. They don't really care about the legacy of the series. So that's generally how I'm going to talk about it here. Going to try to avoid too many comparisons to a certain other open world driving game that ends with Z. And no, I am unaware of any pizza related racers, so you probably know which one I'm talking about. Starts with 4. And the reason for that is we kind of know what this game is trying to do. No reason to dwell on the obvious here. With that said, let's get into this. So, in Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, you're dropped into a one-to-one recreation of Hong Kong Island on a quest to do open world driving stuff. The story is very thin. There's a big Solar Crown tournament. There's qualifying races. Your goal is to win. Pretty standard, but with a weird iPad techno aesthetic to the tournament organizers. You fly to the island in a helicopter, drone, and the hotel and all the garages and the car dealerships have this quasi-futuristic look for whatever reason. I don't entirely get that. It's not Shenzhen, which is a little bit newer of a city, but that's neither here nor there. So one of the more interesting things about the original games were that you could actually get out and walk around as your guy, your avatar. You'd have a little house to walk around in. You could purchase new properties with your race earnings. This game keeps a little bit of that. You can walk around in your sterile hotel room and wander to car dealerships and stuff like that. But that stuff would have been just fine as menus. It's not bad or anything. They just don't feel like real places, more like digital showrooms, which is not, it's not helped by how every interior feels like they all have the exact same design regardless of where you are. The meat of the game, though, isn't that. It's racing. This is a racing game after all. At first, you're given a supercar as a taste of things to come before busting you back down to a selection of crappy everyday vehicles. And from there, you gotta work your way up, earning cash and reputation. The general flow of gameplay is that you unlock a region with some new races. You grind objectives in order to gain money and reach the next breakthrough in rep. And then you unlock the next region, and it basically keeps going like that. The progression is surprisingly linear for an open-world driver. You get one region with its specific challenges, and that's until you get enough rep to unlock the next area. Usually these kinds of games give you a few different tracks to go down, like an off-road tournament, a street racing tournament. But here you do some street racing, then you unlock off-roading, then the performance cars, and that makes the progression feel a bit more like a slog than it needs to be. And part of that is downstream of the fact that the racing is fine. It's okay, there's nothing groundbreaking, but it's not bad. It's all right. It wasn't great, but it was fine. Each type of car does feel different from one another. Like a classic muscle car feels pretty different from a Ferrari or an off-road four-wheel drive vehicle. That's not something to brag about, really. Like, if the Ferrari, the muscle car, and the off-road four-wheel drive vehicle all felt the same, that'd be really weird, honestly. The racing kind of feels like a middle ground between arcade and simulation. Doesn't really fit into either category, so it's kind of in an awkward position of being a little too dry while also not being technical enough to satisfy people who like the more dry racing. I'm more of an arcade racing fan. I do like a good sim, and given the fact that I do enjoy both types, this middle ground idea sounds like a good idea, but I don't know. You don't get the thrills of something like a Burnout game because you have to drive carefully if you actually want to win. You can't just jam the accelerator and power slide your way to victory, but at the same time, it doesn't really penalize you for reckless driving. So most races inevitably devolve into bumper cars because there's nothing really keeping you from using your opponent's cars as a cushion for particularly tight turns. Slamming headfirst into traffic slows you down for a second, doesn't do any permanent damage to your vehicle, There's no damage modeling at all, really, other than slight creases that appear on the car model. You can't hurt the engine or damage your tires, but the game still punishes you severely for making mistakes, just in different ways. Sure, you can slam face first into traffic at full speed and you're fine, but if your car doesn't have off-road tires and you touch anything that's not street, your car is just worthless. And it's not enough in either direction. Like, it feels like an arcade racer if it handled more like a sim, which is not that great, honestly. There's no air control, so when you jump, you end up just wiping out. You're forced to sit there for a second after excruciating second while you wait for the game to just finally teleport you back to the track, usually well after everyone else has passed you. You make a mistake in a race, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose, at least after the first few softball races the game throws at you, because the AI just doesn't play around at all, and there are no difficulty settings for the races. The only thing you can do to adjust the challenge of the game is tweak a few modifiers. You can change the race line so that it doesn't appear as often. You can switch from automatic transmission to manual. You can change the effectiveness of anti-lock brakes and traction control, and that's it. The game just decides how difficult a race is going to be, and there's nothing you can do about it. And don't expect anything helpful like a rewind button or anything either. Hell, you can't even pause mid-race, let alone restart a race from a menu. The only races the game lets you restart are the time trials, and everything else you just have to manually quit, restart again from the open world, and that is, let me tell you, irritating. The races are at least fairly varied, not necessarily in objectives or anything, but in location. The island of Hong Kong is by far the best thing about Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. It's not always the best looking. In fact, the first few hours in the denser, more cramped city sections are the least interesting looking areas of the game. But once you progress and things start to open up, it does reveal itself as having one of the better open worlds for a driving game. They really put a lot of work into capturing the character of Hong Kong. There's the dense city sections, of course, but also some remote mountains and winding highways. The more resort-like areas of the island look especially great. Anywhere where there's a nice mix of man-made and nature holds up a lot better than when there's just buildings. When it's just structures, the general low detail of the world stands out a little more. The city areas have this kind of PlayStation 2 quality to them. There's a lot of colored lights, but the textures are really flat and unconvincing. The buildings often look flat and blocky. There's a lack of any real NPCs, and that makes it seem kind of uncanny. There are humans around, but they're sectioned off behind invisible walls and places you can't possibly touch them. Which is weird, because if you've seen pictures of Hong Kong, there's always a lot of people, tons. Like, it's a densely populated place. And all these dead streets seem wrong, off, weird, you know? They're not detailed, but the streets are at least well designed. This Hong Kong actually feels a lot like a city because it's a one-to-one recreation of a city. So it's got confusing highways, a lot of narrow roads, back alleys. Solar Crown has a pretty convincing facsimile of the city. It does not give up and make all the roads 8 lanes that all look the same. There is a great amount of variety in the buildings and parks and houses you find all over the place. What could have been a really repetitive open world location actually manages to be very different in each region. Just driving around the city, easily my favorite part of the game. It is that well done. It's a shame the game doesn't give you a lot of incentive to explore, though. In terms of open world activities, there's not a lot to do. You can go through speed traps, find pickups that reward you all over the place. You get either rep or currency, and that's about it. There's wrecked cars you can find, which you get exactly 1 car for finding them all. And that's about it for extra things to do. For an open world racer, there is just an overall lack of things to do, stuff to experience in the game. There's basic races, time trials. Once in a while, there's domination races, which are just regular races, except you gain points by going through checkpoints, depending on your position, and that's basically no different from any other race. And there's clan races, which are another slight variation on a standard race. At a certain point, the game wants you to join a clan, which is the usual faction warfare kind of stuff you see in these online games. You pick a side, race against the other side, unlock special rewards. Whichever side wins at the end of a season gets something. Normal stuff. The races are essentially the same. It's just online mode stuff. Finally, there's ranked races, the main attraction. And then there's the actual Solar Crown races, only I couldn't actually play them. Here's the thing. When you play a ranked race, you need at least 2 actual players competing. And every time I started a race, I was stuck in the queue. There was nobody else to play with, so I couldn't participate in what are supposed to be the most important races of the game. Now, to be fair, the game was not fully out when I was able to play it, but still, you can't play these unless someone else is with you. That sucks. It's a major part of the experience that I just can't see. and it doesn't bode well for the long-term life of the game if I can't get a game going in what's supposed to be the marquee mode. Even in early access, this game has an obsession with multiplayer. It really wants us to compete against other players, which would be fine if it let you opt in and opt out when you wanted, but you can't. Other players are automatically slotted into standard races. You're not given any options to play by yourself if you want to. That would be extremely annoying if the game ever wanted you to actually win races, but weirdly, for a racing game, it doesn't seem to care a whole lot. Get first place or 8th place, your rewards are basically the same. There's always a few quest objectives that want you in the top ranks, but there's nothing stopping you from ignoring them. It makes it hard to care about how you're actually doing in a race because you always get the same amount of cash rewards from finishing, and it's always not a lot. You make more by just driving around getting 2-star ratings on speed traps than from finishing races. The game is very stingy with cars, too. I was able to afford exactly one car of each category and nothing else. The game never gives you any cars past the first freebie. Everything else you have to buy. Even when they introduce off-roading, they still force you to buy a new off-road car. Sure, they give you some money for it, but it's not exactly enough to buy something on its own. The game never rewards you cars in any other way. You don't get them from special missions or for completing extra objectives. You just buy them, and that's it. At least they let you test drive one before dumping all your hard-earned cash, but it doesn't feel great. That's how it all works. The best open world driving games dump cars on you hand over fist because it's fun and satisfying. It's just better to get a nice selection of vehicles to choose from. But in Solar Crown, you're stuck with whatever you buy for hours and hours as you scrape enough cash together for the next one. It makes for a kind of boring and frustrating experience, too. Races are either brutally difficult or extremely easy, and it doesn't really matter how hard the game decides the AI is going to be this time because either way the other races are extremely dumb and often make huge mistakes to give you a massive lead. To the game's credit, there doesn't seem to be a lot of any comeback mechanics, but that swings both ways. You make one mistake, you're not winning. Period. And if the AI screws up, it's easy to get a massive lead. They never recover from it. And they make mistakes pretty constantly. When they don't, you're probably going to lose no matter how solid your driving is. But if they screw up, it's a leisurely stroll to the finish line, which would be miserable if it mattered, but it doesn't. The whole Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last thing, it's irrelevant here. It's fine to be last. Who cares? It's whatever. As long as the race is done, you get your solar bucks, and you can repeat a race as many times as you want to get more. You'll lose out on a first-time race bonus and a record-beating bonus, but the 35% currency bonus that you get from turning off all the assets will make up for it. Doesn't matter if you're dead last, you'll get more money, and that's what you need. A lot of the systems in the game feel super half-baked too, but I want to reiterate that the actual driving isn't bad. It's a solid sensation of speed when you're driving with the supercars. Kind of disappears if you run into anything because of the bumper car-like crash physics, but when you're driving around, it feels good. Hong Kong as a virtual tourist destination is excellent. It is easily one of my favorite open worlds to drive in, even in the places that look kind of rough, because the commitment to trying to emulate the real Hong Kong is there, and it makes for a very interesting layout, even when the visuals don't quite get to where they should be. There's a lot of places where they do, but there's places where they don't too. The avatars look about 2 generations behind. A lot of the cars don't look great. Most of the interiors are painfully generic. All the stuff that they built specifically for the game, not that convincing, but the parts where they're trying to replicate the real world, they look a lot better. I just wish it was a more interesting game. It's not bad, but other than the world design, there's not a lot that stands out in a positive way. The mission design is as rudimentary as it gets for an open world driving game. It's stingy with the currency, and the online stuff gets in the way of the fun. Have I really come this far and not mentioned that this game is online only? I mean, it explains all the boneheaded decisions, the unplayable ranked races, the lack of a pause button, the absence of difficulty options, the fact that you get almost nothing for getting first place, because the other player can join a race at any time. The game can't force you to win for progression, so I mean, it could be impossible depending on the player's skill level. Always online games just suck regardless of the game. But this implementation, it really exposes the problems of online only. It's especially damaging to this game because the whole experience is just less good because of it. Server issues were constant when I played. The game was down for a few hours when it first launched. It was inconsistent for a while after that. It's been better since then, but being forced to play online it sucks. I mean, what's going to happen when they inevitably give up on the game because of the low population? Are they going to pull the plug and leave everyone who bought this thing for $60 high and dry? Most of the game's content could be played solo, so there's really no reason for it to require connection all times. It just turns the game into a ticking time bomb that'll eventually blow up all the money you put into it. The problem is that there's not much here to justify the online-only requirement. I get it when, a game is really designed around online, but this is not. I ended up playing with all of one other person in an actual race. After more than 20 hours playing this game, I ran into maybe 2 to 3 people out in the open world. It barely mattered in my experience. All it did was make it so I was locked out of certain races, and I'd get kicked out of every game once in a while because of the server malfunctions. So that's Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. My overall impressions are really, really mixed. I love the city. It's a fantastic open world. And while the racing is mostly kind of standard, I do have fun with it. I mean, give me a race and some roads, and as long as it's competent, you're going to have at least some fun. But there's really good tracks here, and the old satisfaction hitting the perfect turn, pulling out a last-minute victory. It's there. It can happen. But in the end, it's a little too bland and safe. I didn't experience a lot of bugs, at least. Sometimes cars would phase out of existence, and there was the occasional server issue, but for the most part, it was very playable. Graphically, it's a mixed bag. Some places look great, some places look outdated. It's not very well optimized, there's a lot of stuttering, but this was all low-level annoying rather than being game-breaking. Ultimately, though, it just doesn't hold a candle to the original Test Drive Unlimited games, and it's not in the same league as the more modern-feeling open-world driving games. If you're burnt out on other driving games, maybe this isn't a bad one to play in a pinch, but only if you're able to overlook the always online requirement. Like I've been saying, the city is fantastic as a playground, but everything else about the new Test Drive Unlimited is forgettable and just not quite there. That's all I have to say, though. What do you think? Leave us a comment. Let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.